The deep dive. We take your sources, philosophical ideas, global surveys, even scientific case studies, and pull out the essential knowledge. Today, we're looking deep into a concept that's both ancient and surprisingly very widespread: reincarnation.
Yeah, it's a big one. And the sources you've gathered, they don't just treat it as, a simple belief. They frame it as key to how the universe works for justice and for souls evolving. So our mission today is really to unpack those core arguments and then look at the data, just how many people across the globe actually accept this idea. It's pretty surprising.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. We're starting with the philosophy, then hitting the data. And the philosophical side, it comes across really strongly in the teachings of Hanshi Deena Naidu you highlighted. Just for context, he's a grandmaster of karate, yes, but also
Right.
involved in kihatsu, that's Japanese, for rapid spiritual awakening and spirit-mind awareness. So his focus is very much on the soul's journey.
Right, and that context is super important because Naidu doesn't really present reincarnation as just a theory. He states it as the truth, an absolute must for consciousness itself to develop. And what's interesting is how he links it directly to karma.
Okay, so why is it essential? What's the connection there?
Well, the idea is that souls have to evolve,
Right.
right? And in Naidu's framework, the only way for a soul to actually correct its past mistakes from life to life is through karma. So karma needs reincarnation to work, and reincarnation needs karma. They're like two sides of the same coin. Life just becomes this series of lessons you need to learn the right knowledge. One lifetime isn't
I
enough.
mean, there seems to be a real sense of urgency in what he teaches, according to your sources. Like, people need to get this now.
Absolutely. He's very clear. Learn this. Open your soul eyes while you're still alive. The reason to avoid this massive shock after death. He actually says souls who weren't taught this feel, quote, absolutely depressed and misled because they didn't accept it on Earth.
Wow. That's a really strong statement. But it kind of raises a question, doesn't it? If the system is meant for learning, why would there be this huge shock and suffering? Sounds like a failure in the teaching somehow.
Naidu does address that by talking about different levels of soul maturity. He suggests, for example, that Christianity offers great knowledge, but primarily for what he calls new and young souls. It teaches essential morality, goodness, right and wrong. It's foundational.
So like spiritual training wheels.
Exactly, that's a good way to put it. Whereas mature souls, the ones who've supposedly been around the block a few times, they tend to accept reincarnation more easily because according to him, the knowledge is kind of already latent within them. The shock, the unhappiness, happens when those younger souls who learned the morality but were also told this is your only life suddenly find out it's not the whole picture after they pass.
I see. So the problem isn't the initial teaching itself, but maybe the perceived limit of that teaching. He's framing it more about soul development stages than saying one belief is wrong.
Precisely. It's about the context, or lack thereof, provided during life.
Okay, that helps clarify the philosophical stance. Now let's pivot. From this idea of a universal truth needed for souls, let's look at the numbers. How many people actually believe this? This is where it gets really interesting globally.
Oh, the numbers are huge. Your sources cite global surveys showing that around 51% of the world's population believes in reincarnation in some form. We're talking billions of people accepting the idea that life isn't just a one-shot deal.
And instinctively, many might think, okay, that's mostly Eastern religions, right? But we need to look closer at that distribution.
Exactly. Of course, Hinduism and Buddhism are major players here, with reincarnation being central. That's about 1.4 billion followers combined. But here's the kicker. If you take those core groups out, the sources indicate there is still something like 2.68 billion other people around the world who hold this belief, even if it's not part of their main religious tradition.
2.68 billion, that's staggering. Nearly 3 billion people believe this outside of the main faiths usually associated with it.
And you see this clash most clearly in the West, especially within Christianity. Officially, most big denominations, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, they reject reincarnation. The standard view is one life, then judgment, heaven, or hell. But the data shows a really significant number of Christians don't necessarily stick to that official line.
How significant are we talking?
Well, various studies suggest somewhere between 24% and 33% of Christians globally believe in reincarnation. And with about 2.4 billion Christians worldwide, that means you're looking at roughly 576 million to almost 800 million Christians who personally hold this belief.
Wow. So approaching a billion Christians are integrating this idea of soul cycles into their worldview. What reasons do the sources give for why they hold this belief, even if it clashes with official doctrine?
The sources list about 5 main drivers. First, just personal spiritual experiences, things people feel they've encountered or intuited themselves. Second is definitely the influence of Eastern spirituality and New Age ideas filtering into Western culture. That's undeniable. Third, and this is really interesting, is how some people interpret certain passages in the Bible. They feel these passages actually hint at or support the idea of multiple lives.
Okay, what about the last two? They sound like they might connect back to that philosophical stuff we talked about with Naidu.
They absolutely do. The fourth reason is that reincarnation helps make sense of God's justice and mercy. It provides a framework where, eventually, all mistakes can be worked through via karma. It answers the why bad things happen to good people question for some. And fifth, related to that, is simply the appeal of ongoing spiritual growth, of soul evolution over many lifetimes. It offers maybe a bigger sense of purpose than just one cycle.
Okay, so if the belief is that incredibly widespread, touching billions, including huge numbers within Christianity, the question becomes less about why and more about, well, is there any evidence? Let's shift from belief stats to the empirical research mentioned.
Yeah, and this is where the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies comes in. Their work is pretty unique.
Yep.
Dr. Ian Stevenson started it, and now Dr. Jim Tucker continues it. They've spent decades systematically looking into cases, mostly involving young children who claim to remember past lives.
Okay, cases involving children, how many are we talking about and what makes them, worth studying? How do they check them?
They've documented and investigated over 2,500 such cases. Typically, it's kids between 2 and 7 who just start talking, sometimes spontaneously, about a life they say they had before. The key is the verification process. They look for specific, objective details that the child couldn't have learned normally.
Can you give an example? What kind of details are verifiable?
Sure, they check things like names of people or places from the alleged past life, how the person died, specific events. Sometimes there are even physical correlations, like a child might have a birthmark or a specific defect that matches really precisely a fatal wound on the deceased person they claim to remember. Or they might know intimate details about the previous person's family or habits, or even bits of a foreign language they weren't exposed to.
That definitely adds a different dimension, moving beyond just belief or philosophy towards something potentially testable or at least documentable. Looking back at the broader data, what about demographics? Does age play a role in who believes this?
It seems to. That Pew Research survey across 35 countries found the overall average belief around 33%. But the interesting part was the age breakdown. Younger adults, specifically those under 35, were consistently more likely to believe in reincarnation compared to older generations. So the idea seems to be holding strong, maybe even gaining traction with younger people.
Okay, one last area we need to touch on is the historical angle, especially within Christianity. There's that persistent idea, that theory, that maybe Emperor Constantine had references to reincarnation removed from the Bible.
Yeah, that theory pops up a lot. Probably because, for some, reincarnation seems to fit well with ideas of divine justice or soul progression. But the historical scholarship doesn't really back it up strongly. The main event people point to, the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, was overwhelmingly focused on defining Jesus' divinity and the nature of the Trinity.
Meaning reincarnation wasn't really on the agenda.
Exactly. There's just no solid historical evidence that reincarnation was a major point of debate, or that Constantine ordered its removal. Now, some people might point to non-canonical texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, which talks a lot about spiritual growth and reincarnation into it. But even that text isn't explicit about it. It's more interpretation.
Right. So let's try and synthesize this. We started with Hanshi Deena Naidu's strong assertion. Reincarnation isn't just a belief, it's the truth, vital for soul evolution and karma, especially for young souls. And then we saw the data. Nearly half the world agrees in principle, including hundreds of millions within faiths that officially reject it. It seems personal belief and experience often override doctrine here.
Yeah, what emerges is this really interesting tension, doesn't it, between what institutions might teach and what individuals feel or conclude based on their own experience or reasoning. Whether you see it as literal truth or as a necessary mechanism for justice or just a powerful story explaining life and death. The sources make it clear this is a fundamental human concept. It bridges ancient Eastern thought, modern global belief, and even some intriguing psychological research with kids.
It's been quite the journey through philosophy, statistics, and even case studies. Naidu suggests the search for truth means studying the right sources. The evidence shows vast numbers of people seem to be finding this particular truth, either within themselves or through external influences. So the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Considering all this, the assertions, the numbers, the research, what sources, internal or external, do you now feel drawn to explore, to understand what your own consciousness might hold on this? Something to think about until our next deep dive.